The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, with the bombardment of Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Within days, President Lincoln ordered the blockade of all southern ports. Although the war would be largely fought on land, the survival of the South depended on the seas. Because the South had little manufacturing capacity, it needed to trade with Europe for weapons, materials, and medicines. Savannah, the largest city and port in Georgia, was crucial to the Southern cause, and a line of defensive fortifications was quickly planned for the city. Stout masonry forts like Pulaski and Jackson protected the main shipping channels, but Savannah was still vulnerable to attack from the maze of waterways that surrounded it. None was more important than the deep water of the Ogeechee River, which, if left unprotected, could bring Union troops to within 12 miles of Savannah. Coming up from Ossabaw Sound, the first high ground along the Ogeechee is a bluff opposite a hairpin turn called Genesis Point. Formerly a Wally Indian site, it was now part of a rice plantation, Strathy Hall, owned by fourth-generation planter Joseph L. McAllister. Although his great-grandfather had been a Revolutionary War hero, like most Southerners, Joseph McAllister cast his lot with his state.
3 cannon at Genesis Point, with a chain stretched across the river, would completely control the river. The earthwork redoubts I can throw up in 6 hours with the Negro force I command. I think with this plan we could control matters, unless they should attack in much larger force than I anticipate.
In fact, Major McAllister's thrown-up earthworks would encounter a much larger force than he or anyone could have anticipated, and would engage in a contest that would signal a new era in naval warfare. But its first years were as unexceptional as its construction. When it was built, the fort required little more than rearranging the existing earthen features of the bluff. Where excavation was necessary, the removed earth was used to create walls and coverings for powder magazines and underground bunkers called bomb-proofs. The finished battery was named in honor of Joseph McAllister's father, George W. McAllister. Company A of the 1st Georgia Infantry Regiment was stationed here. The DeKalb Rifles, as they were called, practiced both artillery and infantry drills. Garrison life quickly fell into a monotonous routine.
For some time, nothing of importance worth the chronicle happened. The boys attended to the regular camp life of duty, roll calls, and drill. Those off-duty went fishing along the riverbanks. We live very well out here, that is, the officers. The planters are very kind in sending us things, but our men have a pretty hard life of it. Only government rations to eat, and nothing to keep off the mosquitoes, red bugs, etc. The miserable insects bite very badly. They have caused many of them to get boils and sores from the irritation caused by scratching. Lieutenant Alfred L. Hartridge, Commander, DeKalb Rifles.
But the following year, the tedium of camp life would give way to an action that would bring worldwide attention to this small earthen fort. For months, Union gunboats in the Ogeechee River had shelled McAllister, but could not silence her. Finally, they decided to test their most advanced weapon against the fort's earthen walls. Earlier in the war, ironclad warships had proven their superiority in battles with wooden ships. Now the Union would try them against a land battery. In January of 1863, John Warden, who had captained the Monitor against the CSS Virginia, led an armada against Fort McAllister. Twice his flagship, the ironclad Montauk, engaged McAllister in artillery duels. Both sides fired with stunning accuracy. McAllister's 63 direct hits would have decimated any wooden ship, and the Montauk's powerful guns would have leveled any masonry fort. Yet neither fort nor ironclad suffered any significant damage, and the confrontation was reported in newspapers around the world. The stalemate along the Ogeechee River finally was broken when the Confederate blockade runner Nashville, trying to sneak past the Union flotilla, ran aground just upriver from the fort. The Montauk went after it, and in only 20 minutes destroyed the trapped vessel. Although the Nashville's crew escaped, it was a terrible blow to the Confederacy, which depended on these blockade runners for much-needed supplies. Despite this Union success, Fort McAllister held its own, and 1 week after destroying the Nashville, the Union Navy withdrew, never to try McAllister again. Without the Union threat, camp life again returned to a monotonous routine of drills, inspections, maintenance, and waiting around. In the fetid summer months, disease plagued the camp, and the bomb-proofs were converted to makeshift hospitals. The drudgery and tedium wore on the men. Many requested transfers. Some simply deserted. By the spring of 1864, with the war turning against the South, Fort McAllister began a plan of defensive improvements. By the summer of 1864, William T. Sherman's army had invaded the heart of the Confederacy to destroy its capacity to make war. After sacking Atlanta, Sherman's 60,000 troops began their march to the sea, leaving a 60-mile wide path of destruction behind them. Cut off from supplies and communications, Sherman desperately wanted to reach the Federal ships lying off Savannah, and the most direct path was right through Fort McAllister. Despite the overwhelming odds against them, McAllister's defenders refused to leave. They strengthened their defenses and planted mines, called torpedoes, around the fort and on the roads leading up to it. This tactic would enrage Sherman, who considered it a violation of the rules of war. McAllister commanders realized the hopelessness of their situation and dismissed the married and oldest men, leaving fewer than 200 men to face Sherman's army. From across the river, Sherman sized up the fort.
There it lay in plain view, sullen and silent like a lion at bay, the key to the city we were besieging.
He ordered the 4,000 men of his 2nd Division to take it. Their commander, Brigadier General William Hazen, simply told his troops,
You see what is before you. You know your duty.
At 8 a.m. on December 13, 1864, the first Union troops approached Fort McAllister. For most of the day, Hazen's men slowly advanced to just outside the range of McAllister's guns, while Union and Confederate sharpshooters exchanged fire. One Union general later remembered,
It was indeed a grim struggle, and for some time it seemed to us across the way that the fort would win the day. It certainly deserved success for its unparalleled resistance. Soon, however, the fortunes of the day seemed to be changing in our favor. Our troops fairly swarmed about the fort. Soon our fellows could be seen firing their guns into the fort, evidently shooting down the cannoneers, until one after another the heavy guns ceased firing and all were silent. The sun was down, McAllister was ours, and General Hazen had won his 2nd star.
24 Union soldiers were killed, 110 wounded. Confederate losses were 16 killed, 28 wounded. Afterwards, Sherman wrote of his tour of the fort.
Inside the fort lay the dead as they had fallen, and they could hardly be distinguished from their living comrades, sleeping soundly side by side in the pale moonlight.
Sherman arrived at the fort just as a dinner had been set for the victors, and the Confederate commander, Major Anderson. Sherman was furious that mines had been planted outside the fort, and the next morning ordered Major Anderson to fall in with the enlisted men to clear the torpedoes. Anderson protested that it was an improper treatment of prisoners of war, but Sherman stood his ground. As the fort was being dismantled, Union photographer Samuel Cooley thoroughly documented the site. In addition to their irreplaceable historic value, Cooley's photographs also helped reconstruction of the site, begun by industrialist Henry Ford in the 1930s. Today, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources continues to conserve and improve this extraordinary site, where naval history was made, Sherman's march to the sea ended, and men of exceptional valor laid down their lives for their beliefs.
Take a spin in Henry Ford's southern town on the Coastal Bryan Heritage Trail by downloading the free mobile app or picking up a map at the Richmond Hill Visitor Center or History Museum. There are 30 stops, which include the beautiful Martha Mary Chapel, the Ford Commissary and the Ford Bakery, now the Richmond Hill Visitor Center and Art Gallery, the Ford Kindergarten Building, which holds the Richmond Hill Historical Society and Museum, and Fort McAllister, a site originally used to guard Savannah from Union attacks and later owned and restored by Henry Ford. The fascinating people, places, and stories of Richmond Hill's heritage await on the Coastal Bryan Heritage Trail.